So this is kind of part 2 about the being molested and raped when I was a baby. Other things that the United States government did to me is I was getting raped with objects. And, doing the oral sex for a man when I was a baby, I just remember that. I didn't think it was bad necessarily when I was a baby. I just remember what they were doing. Remember, they'd torture me, and I would be in pain, and I would be hurting. And then they'd quit torturing me once I started sucking on a man's penis. That also involved some relatives. It wasn't, but those relatives, as far as I know, were also working for the government, or were coerced to work for the government. They were involved in that. The other thing they did was they assaulted me, like raped me with objects that were hard and like pipes, like some kind of a small pipe of some kind, and gun barrels. They would shove a gun barrel into my vagina when I was a baby, and I remember they just jam it as hard as they could several times, and they made sure that I was crying and in pain, and I had damage from them doing that. And at one point when I was older, I heard them joking about it, saying, "We don't know which way to go. We don't know whether we should go to the right side or to the left side." And they were jamming a gun barrel into a left side because they wanted to make a left pocket inside of my vagina, and then they wanted to make a right pocket inside of my vagina, so it wasn't just one normal opening. They actually damaged me so that they had actually changed the structure of the inside of my vagina. They did severe damage to me. And I remember how they were doing that and why that was. So, these are people who, again, worked for the government. They had licensed guns. These were not gangsters that were just attacking me. Because, if they were gangsters just attacking me, wouldn't you think that all anyone would have had to do is call the police? Well, that wasn't possible because the police were involved. It was the police. The police were committing these crimes against me. There was no one to go to. The FBI was involved. There was no one that was standing up for me. And there may have been a hero there, but if so, they probably got killed. I think the only way that someone would be able to really speak up about what happened is if we did it in a group, so that it was large enough that government didn't just knock them all out, or knock one of them off. So the other things, and the government, a lot of these people didn't want to report it. I mean, there were a few that did, and there were a few that were being threatened with being called crazy. Like maybe one of the Bobber Dixies didn't want to go along with it, and they've got one out in the public eye. What are they going to do with the other couple? Just put them in a nut house and torture them, make them suffer for not going along with what they want? I mean, you can do some pretty nasty things when you have identical twins on hand, because you can make all kinds of threats what you'll do to them in private, and say things like no one will ever know, because they think you're out in the public right now, don't they? And because the government controlled all of this, they could also torture me more whenever they wanted. It wasn't like they were protecting me. They sometimes made a pretense of protecting me, like they'd jump to my rescue here and there when I was older, when I was getting raped by sometimes foreign officials, and it was all a show, because they didn't really care if I was getting raped. This government is the one that set me up to get raped. they were raping me on a regular basis. So for them to try to pretend like they were rescuing me was basically just a cover for them, because they wanted me to somehow think, after all they'd done to me, that they're the good guys. And, oh, we're helping you. You know, those other guys were raping you, and we're helping you. Well, you know, those other guys would have never been able to rape me if the United States hadn't trafficked me to them for that purpose in the first place. So the other thing that they were doing is I was getting assaulted in cribs as well. I remember being in different cribs. So it wasn't just one person watching me all the time. And I was getting babysat by some different individuals, and they all did different things to me. A few of them were nice, or seemed to be nice, some of the time. And then a lot of them harmed me in some way. In one situation, there was a gun trade that was being done. It was like a government undercover gun kind of a thing. They're making a deal, and then they had me in a crib, and they decided to start blowing horns in my ear. So they'd have a musical instrument like a horn, you know, that you play. And I mean like a trumpet horn. I mean like something loud. Or that could be very loud. They'd put it right up to my ear and then blow on the horn as loud as they could, so that at some point I thought I couldn't hear the same. And they were using musical instruments for whatever reason to torture me with. And that's in addition to using headphones. And when they sometimes put headphones on me, sometimes it was just blocking my sound completely. Other times it was this like white noise, and it was just that forever. I mean, it's just for a long time, all I could hear is this like sound, same sound. Other times they were playing like code type weird stuff, like tapping noises. It's possible that I remember some of the tapping noises because they had me in a CT or a MRI machine, but that wasn't always the case. Sometimes I was out on an open table, not in an enclosure of any kind. They did PET scans of me. Those were pretty new back then when I was a baby. Those were very new. But they were doing a whole brain workup of my brain. And then torturing me at the same time. From what I remember, it's very possible some of that happened in outside of the United States, because some of the PET type stuff, they were involving some pretty elite individuals in that. The other things that they did, when I say being tortured as a baby, they were putting like shock things that would shock me on my body as a baby. They also had my hands tied up and my feet tied up in specific ways so that I couldn't untie them. They sometimes would poke me with pins, like diaper pins, and other times they'd cut me, like on the bottom of the foot. If I kept screaming, or I don't know if I did something wrong, they'd take a razor and they'd cut me on a place where no one would notice. Like top of the foot or the bottom of the foot, I'd get like a little small nick or cut. And so then what happened is, after they were doing these different molestation situations with me as a baby, they also they were doing deprivation of food at a young age too. I had a bottle, and I remember one time I was in a crib, and I usually got a whole bottle of milk, and I drank the milk and fall asleep. And they one day said, well, she doesn't need a whole bottle anymore. She can just have a half. So this woman standing next to my mom over my crib, my mom looked upset, but this other woman wasn't upset, and she was making the orders. She was directing my mom, telling her what to do, saying she's fine with a half a bottle of milk now. So they went through periods of fattening me up to be like just really fat, and they went through periods of starving me. So other things that happened is I believe when I was very little, even probably as young as a baby, I began to recognize if the phone rang and someone had to answer the phone, that suddenly people who were already focused on torturing me, it occasionally interrupted them. Or if the doorbell rang, someone was at the door. And so I began to recognize the bell ringing, like the doorbell ringing or the phone ringing, as potentially a way that was going to alleviate me from being tortured. And at some point I may have started, even as a toddler, I may have started screaming to try to get help. I'm not sure, I just do remember that I recognized that when certain things happened, they stopped what they were doing, because they were worried someone on the outside was going to find out and they'd get caught. And someone on the outside is kind of like the general public, because at that time it was a ton of people who worked for the government. And what they started doing is they decided that that they were going to just, this government was going to just keep raping me. And they trafficked me out of the country and allowed other men who had pedophile tendencies, they were very high in their positions, to rape me. I was very pretty. I was a very pretty little baby. Very pretty, very, very pretty little toddler. I mean, I think anyone could probably objectively look at some of the toddler photos of me and say this is a really beautiful little girl. And they were basically just feeding me to a bunch of pedophiles. So it wasn't just government. Didn't seem to have just a government objective aside from the government just making money off of feeding me to people who were pedophiles, who were sometimes rich, and they sometimes thought they could get favors from later. And so then from that came up this situation where I call it milk for blowjobs. And, you know, when I was a baby, they were putting popsicles in my mouth and then trading them back and forth between a penis and that I was supposed to suck on and a popsicle. That's something that Central Washington Hospital in Wenatchee, Washington did with my son. And they also did it with me. And they did it with me when I was a little bit older, around like age 4 or so. And I remember one of the times, it could have been younger than that, but I remember one of the times it happened in their hospital. And so this milk for blowjobs was basically, instead of a popsicle, they wouldn't give me my milk in a bottle until I sucked on a penis.